Hey guys, what's up? I'm Noah, this is Analog Resurgence, and today I'm taking a look at a 16mm Bolex camera. This is a 16mm Bolex camera. Bolexes are an incredibly popular type of 16mm amateur movie camera, and they were made by a Swiss company called Peliard during the 1920s and into the 1970s. Now, during that time period, they made a bunch of different models that all have a bunch of different functions and features and even accessories that you can get for all those cameras. But today I'm just going to be doing a bit of an overview on kind of the standard features that you can find on most Bolex cameras by using my own personal model. First of all, Bolex cameras are all non-sync cameras. And non-sync cameras means that you can't properly sync up audio with the footage that you've shot. Because most of these models contain spring-wound motors, they don't run at a precise enough speed in order to maintain a consistent frame rate for you to sync audio with afterwards. There are Bolex models though that you can get really special electronic motors for. These are called crystal sync motors, and they will run the motor at a proper speed for you to be able to sync audio with afterwards. Now, when it comes to Bolex cameras, there are really two main categories: reflex models and non-reflex models. Reflex is when a camera actually has a viewfinder that allows you to see through the lens that you're actually shooting with. In 1956, Bolex introduced a reflex model, and most models after this one did contain reflex viewfinders, and they used mirrors and prisms to allow you to actually see through the lens that was in front of the film. So this lens down here is actually being used when you shoot the film. Now, Bolex also made a number of non-reflex 16mm cameras as well. Non-reflex cameras actually meant that you had to be more precise with your framing and your focus, because those were things that you couldn't actually check when you were rolling and shooting your own film. My model is a non-reflex Bolex H16T, and it was manufactured around 1958 and is one of the later non-reflex models before they switched over to making entirely reflex only models. So the majority of Bolex cameras have a 3-lens turret on the front of them. This can hold 3 individual lenses at once, and you can rotate it in order to shoot with a different lens. Peliard made lenses under names like Switar, Yavar, and Pizar, and these are C-mount lenses that would just screw into the mounts here. There are other C-mount lenses out there that you can use on these cameras. For example, these are really cheap early broadcast C-mount zoom lenses that will mount on the camera as well. These lenses are just not of the same quality, so you might get some softer results or even a little bit of color shifts here and there because of the quality of the glass inside of them. You can also experiment with adapting different lenses using a C-mount adapter. For example, this Angenieux zoom lens has an Arri standard mount on it, but I can mount it onto the Bolex using the C-mount adapter. This lens is also a little inconvenient to use unless you have a little bit of lens support on it, but you can adapt smaller lenses to be used with C-mount adapters for the Bolex. On my non-reflex model, this lens in the top position is what I can actually see through when I'm looking through this top viewfinder. This allows me to set up the shot and get my initial focus on the lens before I start shooting. This middle position down here is in front of the actual film gate, and any lens here is the lens that the film is being shot with. So for my non-reflex model, I can preview the focus and the field of view of the lens by looking at it when it's in the top position here. Then when I want to actually shoot my film with it, I have to rotate it down into this middle position. So then it's actually in front of the film in the camera. So in order to frame my image properly with the lens that I've chosen to shoot with, non-reflex models need a secondary viewfinder on the side of the camera here. There are a couple of different models that you can get for your non-reflex camera, but they work to approximate the framing of the lens to help you know what the lens is seeing. These viewfinders have some sort of dial or a slider in order to change the view based on the focal length of the lens that you're using. So when I shoot using this 25mm lens, I want to set the viewfinder to 25 in order to match the field of view. If I'm focusing on something close to the camera, then the viewfinder needs to be adjusted for that as well. Matching the focus distance will angle the viewfinder a little in order to match the frame. So shooting on my non-reflex model does require that little bit of extra prep and precision before I can just immediately start rolling, because I want to be sure that I've got the lens in the right position, that my focus is proper, and then that I've set my secondary viewfinder to the proper framing of the image. But one of the big pros of these non-reflex Bolex cameras is that they are typically much more affordable than the later reflex only models. angles. You can also pick up a lot of these lenses for a lot cheaper as well. If you're shooting on a non-reflex Bolex and you're using these Bolex lenses, then you want to be using ones that say AR on them. AR stands for anti-reflex, and they're set up a little bit differently than these Bolex lenses that say RX on them, which stand for reflex. On reflex models, there's more components separating the film from the actual back of the lens that you're shooting with. So certain reflex lenses are designed in a way to compensate for those extra prisms in there that create the viewfinder. It's not a big problem, and you can use reflex lenses on both reflex and non-reflex models, but it might just change a little bit of how the lenses focus properly when you put them on different cameras. And the RX lenses are typically much more expensive than the AR equivalents. So on the side of your camera are all your different settings. This switch will either engage or disengage the spring motor of the camera. Now, if you're storing it for a long time, then it's good to disengage the motor and make sure that the camera isn't wound and ready to shoot. Switching this up means the camera is ready to shoot. The Bolex is spring wound, so the big handle on the side allows us to wind up the camera in order to shoot. Winding this handle counterclockwise until it stops will prepare the motor to move the film through the camera. Afterwards, you can flip it down into this spot here so that it's not spinning around when you actually go to shoot. This dial here is your film counter, and it will go all the way up to 100 feet in order to tell us how far into a roll of film we are. This over here is our frame counter. It will let us know how many frames have been exposed and can be used if you're doing frame by frame work or precise double exposures. It can count up to 1,000 frames. The top dial counts 0 to 50 and the bottom dial counts 100 to 1,000. Turn this dial to set the top portion to 0 and this dial to set the bottom to 0. Now when you shoot, this will begin to go up. This dial is also used if you have a secondary crank for either hand winding the camera or rewinding it for double exposures. This switch is used when doing a single frame exposure. I is for interval and T is for timed. Interval will shoot a single frame at about 1/40th of a second. Timed allows you to have the shutter open for as long as you hold the button down, so you can do long single frame exposures. This dial has our frame rate options on it. You can shoot as low as 12 frames per second or as fast as 64 frames per second. This switch allows us to run the motor continuously until it winds down by clicking it into place here. Pushing it forward will do a single frame exposure based on what we have our shutter set to up here. On a full wind, a Bolex will shoot for about 30 seconds, and you can run the motor by pressing down this button at the front. When you press it, the film will advance through the camera, and when you release it, the film will stop. On the other side of our camera is our film door. We open it up and remove it to see the film compartment. Now, a Bolex takes a 100 foot of 16mm film inside of it, and these 100-foot rolls of film come on daylight spools. The compartment holds 2 spools. Up here is where the film is loaded, down here is where you need a secondary empty daylight spool for your take-up. So if you have a Bolex, then you need to make sure that you have an empty spool in order to shoot your film. When you buy a roll of 16mm film, it will only come with 1 daylight spool that already has film on it. Now 100 feet of film on a daylight spool is safe to handle outside of a darkroom, so you can load this without needing to be in complete darkness. The film threads through the camera in this direction, and we can see some arrows that show a diagram of exactly how it feeds. Now in an upcoming video, I'm going to focus specifically on the mechanics inside of the film compartment and how to load the Bolex properly. Once the film is loaded up, the doors go back on this side of the camera and you're ready to shoot. So those are really the basic functions and dials that you can find on the Bolex camera, and how to get started and wind up the motor and get everything ready. Now a lot of Bolex models also contain a filter slot on the side of them. This allows you to get plastic filters and slot them inside in between the lens and the film, so that you can use for different color adjustments or convert daylight film to tungsten balanced film or tungsten balanced film to daylight balanced film. My Bolex is a model that doesn't have a filter slot on it, which is one of the bigger inconveniences of this specific model. One of the alternatives that I have to this though is to use some filter step-up rings on the front of my camera. This allows me to use higher quality glass filters that you can get in really common threaded sizes, and then they can go directly on the front of the lens. Now if you're trying to understand all the different Bolex models that exist out there are some great resources online that break down all the different models, and I'll throw a link to a lot of that information in the description below for you guys to check out. And in the future I'll do a video that kind of delves more into Bolex over the years and the different models that they made. But if you are trying to determine the difference between reflex and non-reflex models, one of the instant giveaways is how the viewfinder at the top of the camera looks. non-reflex. See, this non-reflex viewfinder is actually its own individual unit and can be removed, and you can see a gap where it just looks down into a little screen below it. But these full reflex models actually have the viewfinder as a whole component attached to the camera at the top. It's rounded down and there's no gap in between where the viewfinder is just looking down at another screen. That's always an instant giveaway as to whether or not the camera is a reflex or a non-reflex model of a Bolex. I would definitely recommend the Bolex to amateurs out there who are trying to get into 16mm. It's really popular, it's really easy to find different models and get different accessories and lenses and play around with and experiment. And I'm going to look at some of the other more specific features in the future as well as how to load it, such as how to double expose it and get some more interesting in-camera effects that you can do on it. So that anybody out there who's looking to get into shooting 16mm for the very first time can figure out for sure whether or not the Bolex is the camera for them. Hey, thank you guys so much for watching and checking this out, and I hope that you enjoyed. And I'm going to have lots more Bolex stuff coming in the future as well. And subscribe if you haven't done so already, as I continue to post new analog content like this every week, from motion picture film to photography film, and just focusing on a lot of different subjects for you guys. And if you're at all interested in supporting the channel, there is a link to the Analog Resurgence Patreon in the link down below. You can head over there and check that out. Any sort of support or funds or just further interest in this will allow me to continue to do more and more of this stuff in the future. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys soon. Hey everyone, here is a shout out to all the wonderful people over on the Patreon who supported the channel during the month of May. We have Abby Henderson, Audrius Radzivedikis, Benjamin MacArthur, Bearded, Nakia Jones, Cameron Talley, Carson Fuller, Futigu, Julia, and Ramblings from Canada. Their amazing extra support over on the Patreon is allowing me just some extra resources in order to help plan for some more future content to put up on the channel for all of you guys. And we have an extra special shout out to one of the amazing patrons over on Patreon who has donated just a little bit more to the channel and has added some extra support that is going a long way, and this is for Carson Fuller.